What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by my friend Ron Cook, host of the St. Louis Sportists podcast. How you doing today, Ron?
Doing well. What about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm ready to dive into some St. Louis sports history. So the official title of this podcast is The Triumph and Tragedy of Pro Sports in St. Louis. I think it gives you a hint about some of the topics we're going to cover. So we're going to talk about the history of professional sports in St. Louis, in all of the major sports. And we're going to start with the good stuff, because that's what we're about here. So on the baseball side of things, so I think the team I closely identified, with the history of St. Louis and with the city pride, I would assume, are the St. Louis Cardinals. Aside from their tenure in the city, what is it about this team that makes them so closely tied to the city?
Well, the Cardinals are, I saw someone once describe the Cardinals as providing the soundtrack of the summer. And I just love that description so much because, like, every night you hear the games on the radio, you see the games on TV, and that's at every restaurant or bar that you go into. If you go to someone's home, the game's on, somewhere. And it's almost like inescapable. And it's also very generational. I'm a third generation Cardinal fan. Both of my grandparents were Cardinal fans. My parents were Cardinal fans. They went to Cardinal games together. And, I'll be sitting there with my wife and think about that. It's a shared experience. And, opening day in St. Louis is a civic holiday. I mean, the city shuts down. And if you're listening to this and you've never been to opening day and you like baseball at all, make a pilgrimage to opening day in St. Louis. It is something absolutely special. You have the Clydesdales. The players come in either convertibles or pickups and circle the stadium to get out and walk past the World Championship trophies and be greeted by the Hall of Famers before they go line up down the down the baseline. So it's just a spectacular thing. And, like I said, children and pets are named after former Cardinal players. It's part of the fabric of the city.
I've had the pleasure of going to a game. It was the middle of the summer, so it wasn't quite opening day. My wife and I were doing a cross-country road trip, and I tried to time it with as many baseball games as possible. And thankfully, we were able to sneak one in. I want to say it was Cardinals Brewers, maybe. It was a long time ago, but it was just you could feel the history in the building, and I think it's one of the few cities with this like century long baseball tradition, which is incredible. I know it's hard for you probably to pick a singular moment, but are there a couple moments that stand out to you that are particularly close to you?
Well, the first has to be '82 when the Cardinals beat the Brewers, and that was the first World Championship I was alive for. And I was born in '68, and my father was starting to give me a hard time, saying, Ron, the Cardinals haven't won a World Series since you've been alive. I'm beginning to wonder if you might be some bad luck. So I got that monkey off my back when Bruce Sutter struck out Gorman Thomas to end that World Series. That was a great moment. And there's so many, it's hard to pick from. Albert Pujols hitting the ball off of the train tracks against Brad Lidge down in Houston in the playoffs when you thought the series was over. David Freese, my goodness gracious, David Freese, who is from Wildwood, which is where I'm coming to you from right now, with 2 strikes, facing elimination in the World Series, getting the triple, and then coming back a couple of innings later and hitting the home runs to win the game. I could go on, but yeah, those are 3 that just really jump out.
And of the 11 World Series titles, which is an impressive number, I think they're one of 3 teams or 4 teams that have double-digit World Series titles. I'll say Yankees, Dodgers. I think the A's have 9. I should know this. I'm an A's fan. Of the ones that happened in your lifetime, what was the most special to you?
I would go with '06. It's the last one my father was alive for. And we were given no chance. One of the national writers was asked for a prediction, and he famously said Detroit in 3. And so we entered the game as prohibitive underdogs. And fortunately, the Detroit pitching staff forgot how to field the baseball. They treated the ball like a live grenade the whole series and made a number of errors. So bad that a fan brought a sign to the last game that said "hit it to the pitcher," and we ended up winning in five. And I got to share that one with my father, so that one was very special.
That's incredible. Was there any in their long history in St. Louis? Was there any signs of them potentially leaving at any point? 'Cause
There
we're
was a
going to touch
time in
on
the
that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately. There was a time in the 50s where there was some instability. They had a not necessarily stable ownership situation, and some threats were made. The Browns, of course, went to Baltimore, and so that's great if you play the Immaculate Grid. You can use your St. Louis Browns as Baltimore Orioles. But there was a little bit of diciness there, but we've reached a point now where I think the Cardinals are such an establishment in the city that I don't think they're one team I don't think we have to worry about leaving town.
Yeah, it's an established brand to the point of, I mean, you throw it in with the Yankees, the Dodgers, again, these really old school teams that with a century plus long history that you can't imagine them going anywhere else. Uh, Another team that's been in the city for a long time, not quite as long as the Cardinals, are the St. Louis Blues, which is of course the NHL team. So they were around for a long time, but they didn't have anywhere near the level of success as the Cardinals. So where do they kind of fit in the pantheon of St. Louis sports?
Well, I would say that the hockey ethos fits with like the St. Louis city ethos very well of working hard and just kind of the hockey mentality fits the St. Louis mentality very well. Kind of blue collar, kind of basically go into the corner and get the puck kind of mentality. And so a lot of the Blues players really embraced the city, which who doesn't like to receive that back from your local team. And I mean, these are the guys that will go to the grocery store and sign autographs until there's no one in line, and things like that. So because of that, people really embrace the team. They love the team. They went to the games. Continue to. Last year they had I think it was either one or two of the 41 home games didn't sell out. Now that's for a team that did not make the playoffs. In not a rebuild, but what they're calling a reset, because we can't use rebuild unless you're totally blowing everything up. But one of the stories I remember, and this is just something that like endears a team and a player. Brett Hull, when he first exploded onto the scene, and they were they were negotiating a contract extension. And they were having the meeting at the St. Louis Arena, a very old, decrepit, but beloved building. And he and his agent said, "Hey, can we go talk it over?" So they walked a couple of blocks down to a local pizza joint, ordered a pizza, discussed what they wanted to change in the contract, went back and finished it. They didn't go like get in the Mercedes and drive to the mansion. They walked down to a pizza joint and then went back and finished it up. And that's the kind of thing that really endears players and franchises to people in St. Louis.
Hmm. And when they finally broke through in 2019, I believe they beat the Predators in that Stanley Cup Finals. What was the reaction like in the city? Was it similar to the baseball or even the Super Bowl when you guys won that?
Brett Hull famously said that when the Blues won, that the bars would stay open for a week, and he was close to right. There was a city celebration like you had not seen before. It was just joyous. The cup was in town, and there was like the spottings through social media of where the cup was showing up, and where they marinara sauce was in the Stanley Cup, and they were dipping toasted ravioli in it and things like that. So it was so long awaited. The waiting made it more special almost.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as a Golden State Warriors fan, that first title, I mean, I'm very familiar with that concept of finally breaking through after, not so much struggling, but I mean, I guess, yeah, struggling is the best way to put it for decades and decades. And I can't speak so much for the Blues, but at least on the Warriors, they were just kind of the basement team for a long time. And then all of a sudden you break through, and that probably means more than any other title, to me at least. So I do want to talk about the newest professional team in St. Louis, and that is, of course, St. Louis FC or SC,
Hmm.
I believe it is. Uh,
St. Louis City FC,
St.
yes.
Louis City FC. These MLS
Or
names just kind of
yeah. Or I'm
they
sorry,
trip me up.
yeah, SC, right.
Yeah.
We,
So it's either, yeah, sometimes they go FC, sometimes they go SC. So I
hmm
always get tripped up. So St. Louis is often called the birthplace of American soccer.
hmm
Can you tell us a little bit more about why that is the case?
Uh, I think that's very accurate, and it goes all the way back to the 40s, where we had club teams that were elite. And one of the most elite teams was sponsored by a funeral home, cutest funeral home of all people, sponsored this club team. And then in 1950, they called it the Miracle on Grass. The U.S. goes down to Brazil and beats England 1-0. And we had about as we, I say we, the United States had about as much chance of winning that game as the hockey team did of beating the Soviet Union in 1980. And there were 8 American-born players on that team. 5 of them were from St. Louis, and they were from one neighborhood in St. Louis, the Hill. And a lot of them played on that cutest team, the amateur team, which toured the country. The cutest team ended up, they won the National Cup once, they won the Amateur Cup 7 times. And then in 1958, the U.S. Soccer Federation said, you know what, cutest, we're just going to put a couple other guys on your team. Why don't you guys just go qualify us for the World Cup? So they went in and they won a couple World Cup qualifying games. They were that good. And the St. Louis Billikens, the soccer team, 10 national championships for the local university soccer team. And then they had 49 appearances. So between the amateur, between the NCAA team, and the high school teams dominate the state. I mean, in terms of producing players, and you've got people like Taylor Twellman and Becky Sauerbrunn and certainly Harry Keogh's out of here, and Brad Davis, and just so many players that have come out of here, out of St. Louis. It's amazing. It's a hotbed of soccer, and the fact that it's taken MLS so long.
That was my next
To get
question
it.
is why?
Yeah,
Why did it take
we don't
so long?
understand. We were blown away that Kansas City got a team so far ahead of us, and but
I think
they
Kansas City was an original franchise in the
yeah.
90s, right? They were the Wizards back in the day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Wizards, which became the Wiz, and okay. But when we got a team, they did it right. The stadium just in the past 3 weeks was named the best sports stadium in the world, believe it or not. And the Carolyn Kendall came in. She's with the Taylor family that owns Enterprise Rent-A-Car. The food at the stadium is all local restaurants. It's not like they went to some stadium services company. So it's like very well-known, beloved local restaurants that have all of the food and beverage around the stadium. And they picked a location in West downtown that is surrounded by hotels and bars. And it's like another little city festival every game day. My wife and I have season tickets. All of our friends go. Just a great day. And the team plays well, too. And there was one point where uh, I went down. It was during a game, and I was at a certain angle, and I just looked down at the field, and I looked at a corner, and I'm like, "This looks like a Premier League stadium."
Mm.
They did such a great job on the stadium, and we've got the St. Louligans, one of the great support groups, one of the great fan groups, with the drums and the entrance, and it's an electric atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, my next question was, have they reinvigorated the interest in soccer? But you've kind of answered that on your own.
Oh yeah. I don't know if there has been a game that wasn't that did not sell out. It's been like one or two, and it probably had to do with the fact it was like 98 or 100 degrees or something.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
pretty
I'm
much every
familiar
game
with,
sells out.
yeah. I was in St. Louis in the summer. I can imagine it's not the most pleasant atmosphere while the sun is still up, at least. Uh, so, but before we move on to the other sports, I'm really curious as to why St. Louis in particular was such a hotbed, or is such a hotbed for soccer. What were some of the factors that started this and led to this?
I'd go back to the beginning. I would go back to the Hill, which is it's a neighborhood in St. Louis, and it had a lot of Italian and Sicilian immigrants that came over, and that was a very active sports neighborhood. Joe Garagiola and Yogi Berra grew up there, so all kinds of sports. But soccer really took hold there, and like success bred success. So once you had those cutest teams, all of a sudden people grew up seeing that success and wanted to play soccer. And then all of a sudden you had the St. Louis University teams seeing great success. Okay, the kids that went to high school knew the kids that played soccer. So it just grew and kept growing and kept growing. And then to this day, now St. Louis City has had two players from St. Louis on the team already, including one of them that's already there. So it's just going to continue, and you've got guys like Pat McBride passed away this past week, unfortunately, and he was probably one of the one of the absolute legends in St. Louis soccer. He played and coached here, and people like him just kind of carry the tradition forward. There are people that carry the torch from one generation to the next, and so it's strong, and I think it will be for a long time, especially with City here now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I mean, I'm glad MLS finally got their act together
Yes.
and put a team there because clearly it was a market that was calling for it and has treated the team, with the appropriate level of attention and respect and love and all that.
Hmm.
So I think we've talked about the good stuff. Let's talk about the not so good stuff.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that the city of St. Louis has had a rocky relationship with professional football, and that started with the Cardinals. So, first of all, how confusing was that to have two teams in the same city called the St. Louis Cardinals?
Well, it's kind of like the Giants. You'll still hear people say the New York Football Giants or Big Blue. So in St. Louis, we had the Big Red. That was the shorthand while they were here. We called them the Big Red. But yeah, we had. I think we were one of. I think we were the only North American city to have two franchises with the same name. But yeah, it was a little bit confusing. But they had and still have a strong fan base in terms of, I mean, they were beloved when they were here. The owner was not beloved, and that was an issue. And so that was a problem. And then the biggest problem, and if you ask me why, if you said what is the one reason they left, they built the wrong stadium. And and
Tell me more.
and by that, so if you go back and look, about the same time you had Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, St. Louis. All of them build the multi-purpose cookie cutter stadiums with the great idea, let's have one stadium that's going to be our baseball and our football stadium. And of course, we found out that it was okay for baseball and really bad for football. And there's a rivalry between Kansas City and St. Louis, I'm sure you're aware of, and it pains me to admit that they got something right. But man, did they get it right in the early 70s when they built Arrowhead Stadium and at the time Royal Stadium. If you want proof, they're still using both of them. Uh,
Yeah, I've been there as well, and they have it's similar to Philadelphia where they have kind of that
right.
complex of both stadiums like across the street from each other, essentially.
Yeah. And Busch Stadium, especially when they made it into a baseball only stadium in 96, worked for baseball, not good for football. And especially because it was built for in the summer, you wanted a breeze. You mentioned you were here in the summer and how hot it gets. Well, they built it to kind of have maximum ventilation. Well, if you, in November and December when it's really cold, uh, maximum ventilation is not good with a wind out of the north. And one of my neighbors had season tickets, and he said that like the wind almost was talked about as much as what was going on the field. So it was miserable to be at a game in that stadium in November and December. And also the seating capacity was 55, 60,000 for football, which was not big enough at the time. So they needed a new stadium. And then we had a lot of infighting among the people in the city and the county. And this is strange, but St. Louis City is not part of St. Louis County. And so
Okay.
it's very odd. But when the time
One
came,
of those quirks. Yeah.
yeah, but when the time came, like in the mid '80s, to build the new stadium or lose the team, uh, there was so much fighting between the city and the county that they couldn't get it done, and they found a site in the county that now contains a casino and an amphitheater. It would have been perfect for a stadium, and the city did everything they could to keep it from happening, and they left. And so
So this would have been outside of the city
it,
limits. It
it,
would
it
have
would have been in
been
St.
in the suburbs
Yes,
somewhere.
it would have been in Maryland Heights, actually, St. Louis County, which is not, I mean, let's face it, the Cowboys played in Irving, the Redskins play outside, there are stadiums outside of the main city. The Braves are outside of Atlanta now, so that's not a problem. But it Bill Bidwell was not well liked in town because he almost looked like a caricature. He had the bow tie, he had the glasses, and he was known to be somewhat miserly. He lost Terry Metcalf, one of his best players, to Canada after the 1977 season. And he fired Hall of Fame coach Don Coryell not by telling him, but by putting a padlock on his office. So he shows up for work one day and his office is padlocked. That's not the way to endear yourself to a fan base. So we hated losing the team. We had great affection for the players. We loved Mel Gray and Jim Hart and Jackie Smith and Jim Bakken and Dan Deerdorf. And I mean, there were some great players and fan favorites, and we loved them, but the ownership was just not well loved.
Yeah, and they've carried that same miserly reputation to Arizona. I think there was the Athletic, they do a survey every year from like an anonymous survey with the players, and I think Arizona is always at the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
where they're just so cheap about everything. They have a state-of-the-art stadium, a great facility, but they charge players for food.
Right.
So, and they have a I believe they charge them for drinks as well. Yeah, just like little things that just show you the true character of an ownership group when it comes to how they spend their money and what they care about. So I guess so they leave in 88. Were there a lot of tears shed, or was it just kind of like don't let the door hit you on the way out?
Um, we weren't sad to see Bidwell go. We were sad to see that we weren't an NFL team, or that we weren't an NFL city anymore. Uh, there was a famous near scuffle between the football team and the baseball team one time because of the playoffs and like who had the field. Jack Clark came out to take batting practice, and the football team said no. And yeah, tempers flared. The things that happen in a single use or in a multi-use stadium. But I would say that there were rumblings of expansion, and we're like, aha, this is it. We're gonna get a team, and it's not going to be Bidwell, and everything's going to be all better, because we knew that in '92 they were granting two franchises, and we knew there was movement to get a new franchise, and we thought that was going to be the answer. So basically, we just suffer a few years without. We get a new team, and we're good to go. And there was momentum finally to build a dome stadium downtown.
Hmm. And the expansion you're referring to, I think you're talking about the Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? Where those teams ended up.
Which St. Louis colossally blew because they made the announcement. They actually broke into local TV for the NFL to announce. They announced Carolina, and then they announced that they were postponing the second city. And that's because not one but two groups from St. Louis were trying to get the franchise, and they were actually fighting amongst themselves. And it was the NFL's way of saying, you guys get your act together. We really want to give St. Louis the city, but come on, get your act together. And
Hmm.
we couldn't. And so that was how we went through the process. that ended up leading to the Rams coming to town.
Yeah, and that was just a few years later, I believe in '95.
95
They
was when they
made
played
the
their first
move.
game, yes.
Yeah, made the move from LA to St. Louis. What drove that move?
The Rams were, they played in Anaheim, which seemed like a good move for them at the time, back around the early 80s. And, Georgia Frontier actually grew up here, believe it or not. And so the new stadium was coming online, and the Cardinals gave a lease deal that they came to regret. It was a very, very favorable deal for the Rams, with an opt out that turned out to be very unfortunate for the city of St. Louis. And so the Rams took advantage of this great deal. John Shaw, her longtime personal and team attorney, worked it out, and they began play here in '95.
And when did as I know it, the Edward Jones Dome, I think it's called the St. Louis Dome now, or I'm not sure what it was called when it was
It's
first
the
opened.
dome at America's Center, and that was one of the
There
ways
you go.
that they got it built, because it's technically part of the convention center. And the Rams were so bad when they arrived. The 1999 team, the greatest show on turf, there was a boat show scheduled for the Sunday when they played the NFC Championship game. So they were so bad that they're like, you know what, it's okay to go ahead and schedule that boat show. We're not going to be in the NFC Championship. Fortunately, they rescheduled it. Yes.
They probably scheduled that as soon as was it not Trent Dilfer,
Trent
Trent
Green.
Green
Yeah.
got injured
Uh-huh.
right
Yeah.
in the preseason when I think he tore his Achilles. They're probably like, okay, there's no shot here. We can go ahead
Yeah.
and schedule that. So
Rodney Harrison hit him from behind and took him down with what a lot of people believe was a cheap shot. And so I had Ram season tickets for 9 years, which I couldn't afford, and I'll just straight up admit that now. But I wouldn't trade it, the experience for the world. And a few years later, the Rams were playing whichever team, the Chargers, and they came out and they passed on the first 14 consecutive plays, which my friends and I were just like laughing every time Warner dropped back. And it later turned out that Mike Martz drew up every single one of the 14 plays to be directed at Rodney Harrison, to where he had to make a decision of who to cover and get. So it was Mike's personal vengeance for taking out Trent Green's leg in that game, or
yeah,
Achilles
yeah,
tendon.
Rodney Harrison, probably one of the dirtier players of the modern
Yes.
era. I think it's safe to say.
Yes.
Um, but let's talk about that team, because I think clearly that was the high point of pro football in St. Louis, that greatest show on turf team that goes on to win the Super Bowl. What was it like to see this guy come out of nowhere, literally from, stocking groceries and playing arena football? It's just, I mean, I know they turned it into basically a Disney movie,
Mhm.
but what was it like happening in real time?
It was unbelievable, and I mean that sounds trite, but it's the best word to describe. I tell people now the quarterback the year before was Tony Banks. Our leading rusher the year before was a guy named June Henley, who played at Kansas, and we had Eddie Kinnison catching balls instead of Isaac Bruce was hurt that previous year. So we went from a unwatchable team to one of the greatest offenses in the history of football. In and I said it's almost like it taints your perception of what you expect as a sports fan, that you can go in 1 year from that bad to that good. But it was amazing, and what it led to when you're watching Georgia and Dick Vermeil hold the Lombardi Trophy is, okay, we won because we banished the Cardinals. We got the stadium. We got a storied franchise. And here we are on top of the mountain as Super Bowl champions. It's like, okay, those 8 years without the NFL were worth it. We sacrificed 8 years without the NFL, and here we are. We win.
Yeah. And you go back to back, at least NFC championships.
Mm-hmm.
You lose to the Patriots in the Super Bowl. You start the legend of Tom Brady and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Before we talk about that, what did you think of the jersey redesign, or the uniform redesign?
I actually, at the time, we liked it. At the time, we thought it was great because It's interesting how cyclical things are. We wanted a little bit of kind of a St. Louis element to the uniform. And we thought, the dark navy, or dark navy, the navy blue and the old gold looked good. I mean, it was a sharp uniform when it first came out. And
Was?
and then they kind of, altered it as they tend to, and I think it went downhill a little bit. But I mean, just, the very simple, navy and gold and the white and the gold, I thought it was a good look. And then, all of a sudden people kind of start longing for the old, kind of LA look, I guess we'll call it.
Sure. Yeah, and so I mean, after that Super Bowl loss, it's fair to say that things were not great for the next decade or so. A lot of not quite bottoming out. Maybe some of the seasons. I know some of the years mostly mediocre
Mm-hmm.
under Jeff Fisher. He's known as Mr.
7
Seven
and
and
9.
Nine.
Mm-hmm. July 9,
Yeah,
Jeff
that's
Fisher
kind of
Day.
yeah, exactly
Mm-hmm.
right. So, when do the rumblings of a potential relocation start to happen?
I would say realistically around 2010. And I think that's one of the great questions is when did Stan Kroenke have it in his mind? Because in the end, we were, the way that I've phrased it is we were playing against a stacked deck with marked cards against someone who had aces up their sleeves. We had zero chance of stopping that from happening. That was going to happen. And there's an article that I shared with you, written by Seth Wickersham, Don Vanatta, and if anyone listening wants to find it on the web, it's called The Wow Factor, and it
Hmm.
talks about that meeting where things went down, and like going into that day, there was still a possibility the Rams could stay in St. Louis. It could have been the Chargers and the Raiders going to L.A. and the Rams could still be here. But that was not to be. Mr. Jerry Jones played a very large role in just straight up, I don't know if I would say strong arming or influencing. I guess it depends.
You could say strong arming.
I think
We
so.
don't. Yeah.
I would go as far as saying bullying. I think he bullied some of those guys in that meeting. And a very contentious meeting. At one point, Stan was asked, or was he asked or told? I think he was told to leave the meeting.
Hmm.
And so someone in that meeting took really good notes and turned them over to these two reporters. And that was just, that's one of the reasons right now why people have such bitter feelings. A lot of people in St. Louis have bitter feelings. I know people in St. Louis that don't watch the NFL. And in fact, one of our sportists does not watch the NFL. Just straight up
That's not surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can see I'm wearing a Raiders hat. I'm familiar with a team leaving uh, this a city that it spent a long time in. It very similar, right?
Mhm.
Where the Rams are go to from LA, they go to St. Louis, then they go back to LA. At least for the Raiders, they go back and forth twice from Oakland to LA, and then they leave Oakland and they go to Las Vegas. And I have friends that have stopped being Raiders fans, one, and then others that similar to your friends have just stopped watching football because they just felt it was such a an underhanded kind of shady backdoor dealings that led to all these teams moving. And I wondered if they had moved to LA instead of Las Vegas, maybe there's a little less hard feelings because at least they're still a California
Mhm.
team. They go back to there's at least a history of them being in LA, and it's not quite as like corporate and plasticky as the them going to Las Vegas. I mean, I'll admit I'm still a fan. I think just because I think as long as they're the Raiders, and I know that it was a really complicated move. There was a lot of political things happening in the city of Oakland that led to them leaving and all that. But that's a separate podcast. So you said there's a lot of people that have hard feelings. Are there still people that root for the fans? Were there still people that were out in the streets celebrating when the Rams won the Super Bowl a few years ago?
Uh, Not nearly as many. Now there are some people that you'll still see like you'll still see people wearing Rams things, but it'll be St. Louis Rams. Okay, it won't be L.A. Rams, but they'll be like, okay, I figure I rooted for the Rams for all that time. I'm a loyal person, so I'm still going to root for the Rams. And okay, I get that. And then there are people like me who want them to lose every game 1,000 to nothing. And
Sure.
I'm. Someone asked me the other day who my favorite NFL team was, and I said I have none. And I said because I grew up watching the football Cardinals with my father, and I was a passionate fan. And then I was invested literally and financially in the Rams. And I'm in my 50s, and I am not going to manufacture affection for a third team. I've been an LSU fan since 1987, and I don't think they're going anywhere. So I'll watch that on Saturday, and but no, and then okay, so I don't feel the need to find a new team.
hmm I think a lot of that negativity has to do with the ownership. At least with the Raiders, Mark Davis is kind of bumbling, but he's mostly a likable guy, I think, and he had some plausible deniability when it came to why he was leaving and all that. It doesn't seem like Kroenke has that. It was all greed influence. Same thing with I'm going through that now as an Oakland A's fan with John Fisher, who is stealing a baseball team that's been there for I think 60 years now. Uh, so I'm leaning more towards your side of things, where they're actually coming up to Sacramento, which is where I'm at. So I'm kind of torn, right? Because they're playing in a minor league baseball stadium 15 minutes from my house, and I want to go see professional major league baseball in my town, but I also don't want to give this guy any money. So
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the hard feelings, and I know people say, "Oh, it's just a business. It's at the end of the day." But I think if it really was just a business,
Hmm.
then none of us would care this much.
No, no.
I don't root for Walmart. I don't root for Costco. I don't, buy my kids Walmart jerseys and say, "Oh, let's go support Walmart." It's just you can't simplify it like that, right?
If it was just a business, have them watch that coverage of that last game at Oakland, and the people weeping. I mean, and the emotion. My gosh, that was that was something. But we can relate to that here.
hmm Yeah, it's generational. Like you said, your parents would go to games. You go to games with your wife. If you have children, I'm sure you took them to games. I've taken my kids to A's games. My first date with my wife was at an A's game. So it's not just sports. It's not just a business. It's so much deeper than that. And it's really unfortunate that it's happened to a great city that cares so much about professional sports. And it was obviously a great home where they had success and a great group of fans. So have any of the fans made the jump to Kansas City? I know there's a city rivalry, but have they used it as an excuse to say,
Oh,
"Hey, we can root for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs now that we've been
it
abandoned"?
has blown my mind how many people have, and to the point where one of the largest radio stations is a affiliate is on the radio network of the Chiefs. The Chiefs are on TV every week. So and it's like my wife, my friends get together for the Chiefs games, as they call it. So it's like that has become St. Louis's team. And the TV ratings for the Chiefs in St. Louis are as high, or in some cases higher, than the Rams, which just shows that they have. And now, does it help that they have won two Super Bowls in a row and have
I was gonna say, yeah, it's convenient.
yeah. Now, if the Chiefs were winning 4 games a year right now, would that be happening? Probably not. And let's say the Bears had won two Super Bowls. Would it be the Bears that were getting all of this? Maybe. Don't know. Chicago and St. Louis is a different story, but
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a deeper rivalry with Cubs Cardinals. I know I was actually this is kind of funny. I was looking through my hats. I was like, do I have a St. Louis hat? And then I was like, I don't want to wear anything that's going to antagonize you. So I was like, I'm not going to wear my Braves hat. I'm, I'm not going to wear my Cubs World Series hat either because I didn't want to start us off
they're
on a
fine.
negative, on the wrong foot. So yeah, I can't see the Bears, but at least Kansas City, it's the same state,
Hmm.
so it's little bit different. I don't know.
Well, and they do, I will say they do football right. I mean, everyone talks about their tailgating, and let's go back to the stadium. Going to a game at Arrowhead is Uh, it's loud. It's almost got kind of the college atmosphere. So yeah, it's easy to get behind a team like that. Much easier to get behind a team like that than certainly like Dallas right now,
Hmm.
which a train wreck on many levels. But yeah, it's easy to root for the Chiefs until, as we've kind of talked about in the past couple years, they're approaching that New England Patriot overexposure, easy to root against phase.
Yeah. And even they're threatening relocation, which sounds ridiculous
Across the
considering
border,
all the
yeah,
success they've had. But
yeah.
yeah. So, is there a future for pro football in St. Louis? I mean, I know the NFL is at 32. They've talked about a team in London, which sounds crazy, but do you see a potential expansion? I don't know if that's on the cards for the NFL.
No, I don't think it would be expansion. I think, first of all, the short answer is not in my lifetime. And I would say, I'll give you three quick reasons why I think that is. Reason number one is the NFL acted so badly in leaving St. Louis, they settled a lawsuit with us for $790 million. So there's 790 million reasons why. And the NFL doesn't typically settle lawsuits. They like to win lawsuits. And they were getting trounced in this lawsuit. They had lost every motion that they had made. And settling at 790 was viewed as a really good deal for the NFL. So they're not really happy right now with St. Louis. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, there's still no place to play. There's no building. There's no stadium right now. The Edward Jones Dome hosts the St. Louis Battlehawks in the UFL. Now, what's funny is
And they had a great following there
they do.
from what I
They
saw.
get 20,
Yeah.
30,000 people. And, Mike Florio in the, wrote in Pro Football Talk, this is starting to get people saying, hey, this might be an NFL city still. And I'm like, yeah, it always was, Mike. Uh,
Duh, right?
but, but they were getting 35,000 for minor league spring football in a bad, it's a bad stadium. I'm sorry. It's dark. Uh, anyway, so yeah, it's there, but I don't know that a new team would want to move into it unless it was temporary with the promise of a new stadium. Now, when the Rams did move, for all of the local dysfunction I've talked about in our city, we had a new stadium ready to go. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but our
No.
governor stepped in. The city stepped in. Enterprise that I mentioned earlier, they had land ready to go. They had drawings. They had like your little flyover of what it was going to look like right down on the riverfront, open air. And they said, Stan, I mean, this was viable when that meeting happened. They said, hey, Stan, open air stadium if you stay.
Hmm.
And, we've got it. The land is done. The financing is done. You've got a gigantic, respected national sponsor. Now, could all of that fall into place for a new team? No. Right now, no. After the way things have gone, mm-mm. So no
Yeah.
stadiums, number two. And then number three, if you would run a good statistically significant survey, I don't know if there's fan support for a new team right now. I think so many people are burned. I don't think it would be like a good, would you like to see St. Louis get an NFL team? Maybe over 50%. Because I think a lot of people are happy enough just saying, no, I'll keep rooting for the Chiefs. That's fine.
Yeah.
And then
It's easier.
yeah, it's easier. And then let me tell you where it would drop like a rock. Would you be in favor of public money going toward that stadium? That's when it falls under 20% right there. And I think that's
So what's going on? Continue.
oh, I
Sorry.
was going to say that's not just St. Louis, but that's across the country. Support for public money for stadiums is just taking a dive.
Yeah, I think with the exception of the Las Vegas Raiders, the Allegiant Stadium was probably the last one. I know the A's are supposedly looking for $1 billion in public money, and that the city of Las Vegas is balking at that. So I could see them and not even ending up in Las Vegas eventually. Uh, but is there anything about St. Louis, like the local political economic landscape, that's doing this, or do you think it's just across the country where team or cities and people are just saying no, we're not going to give you any money for this?
Well, I think that I think it is more across the country that people are saying we have enough in terms of needs of the city, aging infrastructure. Tell me a city that says that their streets are in great shape, or that their infrastructure is in great shape, or that they couldn't be doing more for their people. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that people are finally saying, let's do that before we build a stadium that's going to make money for a Stan Kroenke type person. And I
Yeah,
didn't and
absolutely.
I didn't used to be that way. I used to be the kind of guy that would say, "Are you kidding? Get a team in here. It's jobs, it's money, it's all of that." And I think most everyone at this point is like, well, you're seeing people, a few situations where, like, Carol and Kindle and Enterprise put a lot of money into the stadium for St. Louis City SC. It was built, and I don't want to get over my skis here, but they funded a significant amount of that stadium. So I think that,
As they
yeah,
should.
and I think that's much more palatable to people than saying, "Oh, by the way, you're going to be paying more on your property taxes to build a stadium."
Mhm. Yeah, to enrich, further enrich a billionaire,
Mm-hmm.
we should say.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can close the chapter on the football, and it's unfortunate that it happened, but I mean, it sounded like there were some great times along the way. You did at least get a Super Bowl victory out of it,
Yeah.
which I'm sure was an incredible kind of unforgettable memory.
Mm-hmm.
Basketball. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about basketball in St. Louis. I know soccer, it's a hotbed there. It's a very popular sport there. I think basketball it's also a hotbed
Mm-hmm.
for basketball. I think of Jayson Tatum and Bradley Beal and some other
Mm-hmm.
big time players. You mentioned St. Louis University being a great soccer school. I know they're a pretty good basketball school as well. I know they're in the tournament quite often. So let's talk about some of the history. I think this is probably lesser known to folks than the football history. What's the history of professional basketball or NBA basketball in St. Louis?
Well, the St. Louis Hawks moved here back in '53 from Milwaukee, of all places, and this is the NBA is not an old league. It's actually compared to certainly baseball and football, like a younger professional league. They came in and they had some really wonderful success in the late '50s, going to the finals. They had a player named Bob Pettit, who is one of the elite power forwards in NBA history, out of LSU. Plug the Tigers again. And Bob Pettit, who is still alive, he just had a birthday like last week or the week before, um, led the Hawks to an NBA championship in 1958 over the Celtics. And the Hawks played the Celtics uh, a few times there in the late '50s. It was a pretty good rivalry for the championship, and so yeah, St. Louis, that's a good bar bet. St. Louis does have an NBA championship, and unfortunately, though, 10 years later, the Hawks leave town.
Why? Same reasons as the
Well,
Cardinals?
the Hawks faced a couple of things that were going on. Because a lot of times when you see a team leave, as you know, you should always look at what's going on with the other teams. So the Hawks left in '68. The Blues came into existence in '67. And the Blues were
Mm.
an immediate sensation when they came to town. People were going to the Blues games in jackets and ties, and it was like a social event to go to a Blues game. So they were the new thing. And then, okay, what was going on with the baseball team in '67 and '68? Well, just some of the greatest baseball teams like you'll ever see, with Bob Gibson and Lou Brock and Curt Flood and Roger Maris and Tim McCarver. And so the Hawks were in a solid third place in the St. Louis sports scene. And, it's you're pushed to the second or third page of the Post Dispatch or the Globe Democrat at the time, and you might or might not get on the evening sports report, or it might be kind of, and by the way, Hawks lose 102 to 98, kind of we'll at least get the score in. So they were drawing badly, and they were playing in a building that was not great. It was used for basketball up until the late 90s, but it was not a great, it was the Kiel Auditorium. Not a great building for basketball. Functional, but not great. And so he didn't have a good build. The owner didn't have a good building, and Atlanta was a new market, a rising market, and so he just took the Hawks and out of town they went.
Yeah, and like you said, the NBA is a young league relatively, especially at that time. They were still finding their footing. There was a lot of team movement around that time,
Hmm.
so it's not surprising that, in a league that wasn't doing so popular, I think people think of the NBA now as this multi-billion dollar industry, but I think it's fair to say it's probably close to, on the verge of collapse in the 70s and 80s before it was saved by Magic and Bird. So I'm not surprised at the fact that they left. But the ABA did try in St. Louis. They had a short-lived uh, stint in St. Louis with one of the coolest names, I think, in sports history, the Spirits of St. Louis.
Hmm.
Uh, so what happened there? Why did St. Louis not get an NBA team when the leagues, I should say, the NBA and the ABA merged?
Yeah, it was one of the great games of musical squares in sports history, or musical chairs. Four teams obviously, made it up into the ABA, and the Spirits did not. And by the way, the Spirits did have a very young radio announcer. It was his first gig in broadcasting, a guy named Bob Costas. And
Sounds
yeah,
familiar.
yeah, I don't know what happened to him. I hope he did okay. And the power forward Marvin Barnes. There are so many Marvin Barnes stories. That's a podcast on its own. I tell you. But so they don't make it in. You're right. It was four teams that had a little bit better attendance, and were viewed just generally as a bit more stable. And so the Spirits were playing in the St. Louis Arena, which was where the Blues played, which was not ideal. I mean, it's certainly done now, because you've got lots of teams all over the place that share, but still, it wasn't necessarily an ideal basketball setup, and so the owners weren't able to get in, but they were given an offer by the NBA of taking either a one-time payout or a percentage of the TV contract in perpetuity.
I've heard this. Great story.
In perpetuity. And so they're like, okay, we will take the TV. It was the Salinas brothers. And so they take their, they opt for the TV. And so in 2012, at that period of time, now the TV deal was not a big thing, because if you remember, and I know you do, in the late 70s, NBA playoff games were shown on tape delay at 10:30 at night. So like if you're which is crazy now to think of. But so like but then, as you mentioned, Magic, Bird, and then a little guy, or I shouldn't say a little guy, Michael Jeffrey Jordan comes along out of North Carolina. And then, as a result, in 2014, or as of 2012, that agreement had netted the two brothers $255 million from their ongoing payments. 255 million. In 2014, the league is like, this is crazy, and so they reached an agreement with the two brothers, and they said, we're going to give you one lump sum to end this madness, and so they gave him a lump sum of 500 million to.
That's cheap compared to what we're hearing, the rumors of the recent or the upcoming TV contracts that are coming up.
Yeah,
So
and the only place where it takes a negative turn for the brothers is they were investing with a guy in New York named Bernie Madoff. So that didn't end out so well for them. But otherwise, it has been called one of the greatest investment decisions in the history of American business. To take that, which
yeah,
close to $1 billion over a one-time $3 million.
and to have the foresight to think that, in the 70s, this is what the league is going to end up being, 20, 30 years
Right.
later. So, kudos to them.
Hmm.
Uh, so without the presence of a NBA team for, 40, 50 years, what's the local basketball culture like in the city?
Well, you've got, it's funny that you mentioned Jayson Tatum because there are people that will watch. If you go to a bar, you'll see the Celtics on because people will watch Jayson Tatum or they'll watch Bradley Beal so I'd say we're kind of player driven. Right now, you've got Robbie Avila playing for the Billikens, and he's a really interesting character to watch. You've got this 6'11" guy that passes like Bill Walton at the high post who can also score. So you've got Larry Hughes. We've generated a number of players that have come through that are really fun to watch. And a lot of them. I mean, Jayson Tatum's a good guy. You can tell that just from the interviews. And so
Mhm.
if I had to pick a sport to come back to St. Louis, I would keep my eye on the NBA, and it wouldn't surprise me if someone like Jayson Tatum wouldn't be behind it. That he, might get out of the game and a few years later say, get together a couple people and get together some cash. And if there is a franchise that's having some rocky times or in need of a new building or something, I would think that that could happen.
Yeah, or expansion. I
That
mean,
too.
they talk about Seattle,
Hmm.
Las Vegas, obviously St. Louis as it's kind of crazy that a city that big in an area that doesn't have an NBA team. I think what's the closest team? Chicago and then
Indiana,
Dallas,
right? Yeah. Hmm.
Indiana. Yeah. So yeah, you could draw a big circle on the map there and say, okay, there's no NBA team here. So what's the local team? What if you're on local TV, you don't have cable or whatever. What games do they show
Uh,
there? Is it
but
Indiana?
yeah, believe it or not, on our regional sports network, we get the Pacers, and
Hmm.
but more people are interested in the Celtics again just because of Jason.
Yeah, understandably. Again, it's convenient, right?
Hmm.
You go from, you get a chance to root for a winner, a title contender, a champion. So it totally makes sense. So one thing I wanted to ask you about was what is St. Louis sports culture, right? You think about cities like Chicago, Detroit, they have kind of that gritty blue collar. You could throw Philly in there. I feel like St. Louis is kind of this interesting mix. Again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, of like Midwestern sensibilities, but it's kind of in the South, so it's in between.
Hmm.
So how would you describe St. Louis' sports culture?
I would say that the colleges have sprung up, and when I say the colleges, you've got big followings for both University of Missouri or Mizzou and Illinois. Those games are on all the time. And the bragging rights game, as they call it, is coming up here this weekend. Mizzou, Illinois basketball, which is played in St. Louis. And man, when Norm Stewart and Lou Henson were around, those games were straight up wars. And right now, both of those teams I think have 3 losses between them, so that should be a pretty good game this weekend. So the colleges have stepped in, so people follow the colleges. Certainly the Cardinals, certainly the Blues, City. I think it's just kind of I would say that in terms of you know you hit it pretty well in that it's a little bit more fragmented than it's ever been before. It's hard to pin down, um, kind of because so many people follow so many things. It's like I've got friends and neighbors that their focus is the Premier League. Okay, that's fine. Um, because you've got so much coverage right now. When I grew up, there were 3 TV stations. You had ABC, NBC, and CBS, and those were your choices, and that's
Mhm.
what you watched, and everyone followed those things. And right now, uh, you can watch almost every game of any sport. And I think we're kind of seeing that in St. Louis. I would imagine you are to an extent everywhere. But I just think, that because of that, you're seeing people watch all kinds of sports, and it is kind of taking away from kind of what I would call a macro definition of a city. But the Cardinals are going to bring everyone together no matter what. If they're winning, the Blues are going to bring. Let's face it, those guys. One of the great scenes ever when the Rams moved the next Blues home game the two owners came out, and they were wearing the jackets of the other team, and they did the puck drop, and that was outstanding.
Well, thank you. This was an incredible history lesson in one of America's great sports cities that it just has, again, a centuries-long history of triumph and tragedy in pro sports. So before we wrap up, can you tell us a little bit more about your podcast and where folks can find you?
Yes, our podcast is called the St. Louis Sportists, and it's myself and four guys that I've known for a long time who have watched sports our entire lives, and we just want it to be like basically one of my neighbors listened to it and said, "Ron, I enjoyed your podcast because I learned a lot and I was really entertained." And I said, "That's what we're going for."
Yeah, that's an elevator pitch right there.
And so it's not too long. We want you to say, "Wow, I wish there was more," instead of looking at the clock and saying, "How much more is there?" And so we just talk about things in St. Louis. We talk about things nationally, and it is Sportists, Sportists, and you can find us on all of the major platforms. And the website is stlsportists.com.
Thank you again. I'll make sure to include links and all that to the to your podcast in our YouTube description and the Spotify description, and again, everywhere else that we have our podcast as well. So thank you, Ron. Thank you to our listeners. Really appreciate it.
Glad, thank you.